Hey guys, so prank kids of course have been tearing up the scene lately, so I wanted to analyze their first turn play, looking at how well they play through hand traps as well as some other things. Now these deck specific analytical videos do take me a lot of time to make, so if you enjoyed it, consider sharing the video and subscribing so that encourages me to continue to make these kind of videos. So since I'm analyzing the first turn board of prank kids, I'm of course only considering games where the prank kids player went first for this analysis. Now the main analysis of interest for this video is how often the first normal summon prank kids monsters effect was interrupted by a hand trap. So as most of you will know, the deck's main starting play is to normal summon one of the 4 prank kids monsters, link off into Meow Meow Mew, and then use the prank kids monsters effect to special summon another one out from the deck, and carry out the play from there. I also only looked at the very first turn play and not any normal summons beyond turn 1. Now when we talk about the first normal summon prank kids monsters effect being interrupted, the most common hand trap that will do that is Ash, since they do special summon from the deck. But other common examples of hand traps that can interrupt this first effect are Skullmeister and Sideframe Gear Gamma. Now I also decided to include some more uncommon examples, including Dimension Shifter and Contact C. So these are hand traps that will be used when the prank kids monster normal summons their first prank kid. And while in this scenario they're not actually able to even activate the prank kids effect because they will just leave the normal summon on board, it still prevents them from making their standard prank kids play. So this is still included as interrupting the first normal summon prank kid monster. So overall, our prank kids players who were within top 75 in ranking on Dueling Book won 77% of the games where they went first. Now if they had a starter, as in just any prank kids monster, which was the case most of the time, then they won 79% of those games. But in the rare instances where they just did not have any prank kids monster to start and all they could do was just set and pass on their first turn, which happened about 6% of the time, they won just 39% of the time in this case. Now next, when I look at how often the first normal summon was interrupted, I'm excluding these 13 games where the prank kids player did not even have any prank kids monster to start their play with. So in terms of whether the first normal summon prank kids monsters effect or summon was interrupted by a hand trap, such as through Ash or even Dimension Shifter as mentioned earlier in the video, the prank kids player faced no interruptions 65% of the time. Conversely, 35% of the time when going first, the prank kids player did in fact get hand trapped on that first normal summon prank kids, which is pretty high, so prank kids players should definitely be mentally prepared of getting hand trapped on that first effect. At the same time, in the instances where they were interrupted on the first normal summon prank kid, they were still able to extend into the Dodo Doodle Do 63% of the time, so that's pretty impressive. They can extend through multiple ways, such as having the Pandemonium in hand and going into Rocket Ride, or let's say they have Instant Fusion and bring out Weather Washer and continue from there, or having this spell card Pranks in hand to generate a Prank Kids token. Not to mention, they typically play Triple Tactics Talent or Pot of Desires to draw into these extenders as well. Now of course, just because they were still able to extend into the Dodo Doodle Do does not mean that they did not get hand trapped again, which I did not record due to complexity, so keep that in mind. Anyways, basically you have these 125 games where the prank kids player did not get interrupted on the first normal, and 43 games where even though they did get hand trapped there, they were able to extend. So in these 168 games where they were able to start out their typical prank kids play, they won 83% of the time. Alternatively, in those 68 games where the prank kids player got hand trapped on the first prank kid, 37% of the time they could not extend into the Dodo Doodle Do, and generally they would just set some cards and pass. If this was the case on their first turn play, then they only ended up winning 52% of the time. Now I was also curious on the number of spells and traps that they set on their very first turn play. This can potentially be important because Pandemonium can only be activated in the main phase, so if your opponent had just 2 cards set in most cases, then you would feel more confident in shotgunning your Twin Twisters in your draw or standby phase, for example. So this was the distribution on the number of set spells and traps on the prank kids board for their very first turn play. So most often it was 2 sets at 30% and 3 sets at 26%. Now while you see that almost 15% of the time that they had 0 set cards, this number is actually overinflated. This is because in games where the opponent just scooped right away before the prank kids player finished their turn 1 play, this would be counted as 0 sets because the prank kids player never got to set any cards. So realistically, the number of sets for 1 to 5 cards would be a bit higher. So let's also take a look at the win percentage of when Battle Butler was summoned versus not, and for this I looked at whether Butler was summoned at any point in the game and not just on the very first turn play, since they don't typically bring it out on their first turn play anyways but on their opponent's turn. Anyways, Battle Butler only came out 34% of the time in games where the Prank Kids player went first. It's not a card that they necessarily try to turbo out each time, and depending on the matchup, Rip Rowan Roaster may be better to bring out instead. In the games where Butler was summoned, the Prank Kids player won 87% of the time. But in instances where Butler was not summoned, they still won 71% of the time, so definitely not really reliant on Butler. Certainly different than the big differences you saw between having and not having Dragoon or Winda like in my previous analysis that you can check out, and I'll link those videos below. Now, one other hand trap in particular I took a note of was Nibiru. Now, Nibiru was dropped at any point in the game just 10% of the time versus Prank Kids in my analysis. When the Prank Kids player did get Nibiru'd, they won 70% of the games, whereas if they did not get Nibiru'd, they won 77% of the games. So a little bit of a decrease in win percentage in games where they got Nibiru'd. Of course, this difference is not entirely because of the presence of Nibiru though. Keep in mind of the small sample size as always too. From what I've seen, Prank Kids certainly do have the capability of playing through Nibiru. Interesting thing with this deck is that you can even Nibiru them on your turn, just because if they resolve Pandemonium, then they're typically special summoning out 3 more Prank Kids just from that, so they can certainly summon at least 5 monsters on your turn. And finally, let's finish off the video by analyzing the match win percentage of Prank Kids overall based on several factors. Keep in mind that the numbers you see here are now at the match level, whereas up until now, all of the numbers represented the number of games. So our top ranked Prank Kids players won 75% of their matches, so pretty impressive considering that overall on Dueling Book, which includes both good and bad players, the deck has about a 59% win rate. If they got to go first for game 1, they ended up winning 83% of their matches, whereas if they had to go second for game 1, then they won 67% of the matches. So the deck is a bit reliant on having to go first, and these values are similar to what I've shown in the past for my meta-analysis. Lastly, in terms of win percentage versus different playstyles, Prank Kids did well versus control and beatdown decks at around 82 to 83%, but did not do so well against the other combo decks at 61%, something that I saw in my previous meta-analysis as well. Alright guys, so that was it for my analysis of the Prank Kids turn 1 play. Hope you enjoyed that and hope you found it helpful. Again, doing these kinds of videos do take a lot of effort, so if you guys can show that my effort has been worthwhile by sharing the video and subscribing, I'd appreciate that so that I can stay motivated to continue to make this kind of content. Take care guys.